Most of us don't struggle with knowing what to do. We struggle with starting. And it's not because we're lazy, it's because we are trying to start too big. I've watched leaders delay execution for weeks, sometimes months, because they think the first step has to be impressive, or it has to be complete, or fully thought out. But I'm here to tell you it doesn't. In this episode, I'm going to show you how I start the one thing so small that momentum becomes unavoidable, and why starting small is a leadership advantage, and how going before you're ready is often the difference between progress and paralysis. So, if you've been clear and committed, but you're still stuck, this episode's going to be for you. Welcome to the Leaders Leading Leaders podcast. I'm your host, John Espinosa. And if your goal is to build high-performance teams, I'm going to use my 20 years of experience to share what I've learned. So I know the priority, right? We've talked about that. You've protected it. But why are you still hesitating to start? This episode is going to get you over that hump. So let's dig in. The first topic that we're going to talk about is this topic really of the execution trap, I like to call it. Why do we delay the start? A lot of times we delay because we confuse preparation with progress. How many of us get ready? We're ready to do something, right? We're trying to get that feeling of readiness. I feel ready, but I'm not quite going to start. So when we overplan things, I like to think about a workout plan or a diet. We may plan to meal prep, right? And that meal prepping looks a little bit different for people, but Sunday is going to be our meal prepping day. Well, Sunday comes, we get busy, we get overcome by events. What happens? We don't get to meal prep for the rest of the day. So now Monday, we're going maybe picking up something for lunch. Monday is a Monday. Tuesday, you see how that starts because we overplanned. We don't allow ourselves just to get going, just to say, all right, if Sunday isn't, maybe I don't do it for the whole entire week. Maybe I just plan for Monday and Tuesday. Maybe I buy snacks, and we'll talk about some techniques later. The other reason why I think we fall into this execution trap as leaders is we wait for alignment. And a lot of times, alignment will never come. I can count probably on my hand, one hand, how many times that I've seen alignment prior to starting a project, starting maybe a transition, maybe pivoting in another direction in my business. So that alignment piece really delays execution, and then waiting for confidence before action. Now this one hits home because I used to wait until I felt confident, till I was 100% sure before I could go do everything. But what I found is I wasn't afraid of failure. I was afraid of starting imperfectly. And this is why I got stuck. Many, many times, this is why I got stuck. This is why I didn't move to action. So one question that I want you to ask yourself as we work through the exercises and work through the talking points for today's episode is, what's one thing that you know you should start, but you haven't? Because I want that one thing in the forefront of your mind as we walk through these strategies. Because by the end of this episode, I'm going to guarantee that you're going to start that one thing. So let's talk about how we can reframe, because starting is a decision. It's not a phase. And we need to make this distinction. Planning then becomes optional. It doesn't become a requirement to start. And then once we decide that starting is decisive, we move into action. Because momentum comes after action, not before. If you can think about anything that you started, maybe it's your business. Maybe it's a project around the house. You wanted to paint the house now for 2 years. What happens? You finally go buy the paint, you get the brushes, and you crack that first can of paint. Now what? Momentum comes because that paint's going to dry out. You don't want to waste your money. That's what I'm talking about here. You need to crack that can open and then tell yourself, let's go. Because I don't want to waste money by having to go back to the paint store and get another can of paint. And the one thing here that I want to make crystal clear for all of us is we must model this movement, not certainty. And this is something people will do as we do. They will follow our lead, not necessarily what we say. So if we're waiting for that 100% certainty to come and we delay, that's exactly what our teams are going to model. So we as leaders, as business owners out there, need to model movement because clarity doesn't create momentum. Movement does. So let's get into really the philosophy, the core philosophy of this episode, and it's the start small principle. It's one of my signature beliefs. It's one of the keys to success that I've learned over my 20 plus years of being in training, of leading organizations, of leading teams, because I want to define this clearly. When we talk about a small start is intentionally incomplete. I don't have to be 100% to start small. I just need to start. Just a quick pause in our episode. This might be exactly what you need to hear. If you're currently leading a team or you want to lead a team and you're spending your days putting out fires, you're not failing, you're just stuck. Because when everything feels urgent, nothing actually improves. And over time, that starts to chip away at our confidence as a leader. I've led teams under pressure for years, and firefighting isn't about effort, it's about those missing leadership systems. When expectations are clear and ownership is real, our teams, they stop reacting and they start solving problems without us. So if you're ready to lead instead of react, click on the link below, book a call, check out our consulting programs. All right, back to the episode. To start small, I just need to start. And when we make that start as small as possible, we shrink the start. That gives us, what it does, it decreases the resistance. Small starts also reduce that emotional and organizational resistance. So not just internal resistance, but if we're leading a team, if we're leading an organization, it doesn't cost a lot of money to start small. I always liken it to bake them some cookies and figure out what kind of cookie they like, right? You don't have to bake a whole batch of cookies. You can bake 1 or 2 cookies and figure out what people like. Are they coming back? Do they want more? Reduce that start. We get a lot of emotions around starting new projects, new tasks. I was attending a meeting this past weekend and I was driving down to Texas, and during my drive, this was my very first board of directors meeting, and I was getting nervous. I was getting anxious. And I had to remind myself, John, whoa. Start small. Get into the room. You haven't even made it into the first meeting yet, and you're already building up, this anxiousness about what to say and what people are going to think. So again, what did I do? I reminded myself that was the emotional part of I needed to reduce that. I just needed to show up. I was picked for a reason. I was elected for a reason. I was chosen for a reason. All I needed to do was show up. So that's an example of reducing that emotional resistance. And then the last thing here is a small start reveals reality faster than planning ever will. There was a story I was listening to. I was listening to a podcast, and it was Tony Robbins, and he was talking about this general that he was working with, and he needed to make a big decision. And this decision had been going on for like 10 plus years. And finally, this general, he was going to make the decision. He needed to make it because if not, there was risk to our security. So he had A team of people combed through all of the documents, and then they came to him to present their case. And the story goes is the general got called away the day before, and instead of them briefing him all day long, they got 20 minutes each to brief the general, and he heard what they had to say, and he made a decision. And the reason he made a decision, because they asked, General, how could you possibly know? You didn't hear everything. We only had 20 minutes. He said, because if I'm wrong, we're going to know fast. And that's the deal. When you make a decision and you start small, it reveals the reality faster. You're going to figure out whether it's right or wrong, but you are going to figure out whether it's right or wrong faster than planning ever will. So here's the key line that I want to talk about here, especially with, starting small. If the start feels safe, it's probably too big. So remember that time where you started before you're ready. You jumped in, because I promise you, if you're listening to this podcast, there has been a time where you weren't 100% certain. And it may have been something small, or it may have been something large. It may have been, opening up another department. It may have been scaling your business. Nothing that we do, we necessarily feel 100% ready to do. And that's okay. Also, remember that, the initial step can feel too simple sometimes. You're like, could that really be it? Just go. Take that leap. Just remember, go before you're ready. Turn one day into day one, and then don't miss 2 days in a row. That's what we coach on. That's what, I make sure to tell myself, because I get in that rut. I get stuck sometimes. And then the momentum will follow, just like that can of paint. Once you start cracking things open, once you start getting out those brushes, you're going to need to paint, because that paint's going to dry up. So let's talk about what we get wrong, because these are some common mistakes that I've seen myself, and I've seen others do. One common mistake that I see people do is launching instead of testing. And this kind of goes back to my cookie example, right? Instead of baking 3 dozen cookies, bake a half dozen cookies. Test them out. See what that's like. A good way that I've seen this done in business is maybe do some market analysis. Ask your existing customers, hey, we're thinking about launching a new brand or launching a new product or getting into another market. What would you think? Get some feedback and then go. Another common mistake I've seen is rolling out instead of aligning. And this is something that, especially in organizational change, a company that may be going through a merger or a realignment, I see a lot of times they just publish the organizational chart, and then what? They didn't do any communication. They didn't at least let the workforce know that this was coming. They published the organizational chart. Reach out to me if you got any questions. And then the last mistake I've seen is announcing instead of acting. And we get in this mistake quite a lot, because especially in the world of social media now, you see people all the time maybe going to the gym, taking selfies, and then leaving the gym. They don't ever touch a weight. In the world of AI, we see this a lot just with, what people say and how they say it. But instead, we need to go. We need to start acting. We need to put our head down. And a lot of times, when I start small, I just do it in silence. I do it, give it 2 weeks, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that 2-week looks like. Don't tell anybody, just go. And then after that 2 weeks, you can go announce it to whoever you want to announce it to. Because in the end, we have to, again, reframe here that the first step isn't execution, it's exposure. It's exposure to reality, it's exposure to resistance, and it's exposure to what actually matters. And that means a lot. So let's talk about that first 7 to 14 days. What should they actually look like? Because this is where we're going to get extremely practical here. What must exist early? I want you to identify one action, one metric, and one owner. Next, I want you to identify what doesn't matter, right? What doesn't matter yet? And here are examples of polish, perfection, 100% certainty. Those things don't matter yet. What matters is we just need to get going. And then what does progress actually look like in the beginning? Again, this goes back to the planning phase. What does progress actually look like? Here, I want you to spend a little bit of time, because if we don't understand what progress looks like, then we can't get that momentum. So back to my paint example, progress for me looks like painting one side of the house. Progress looks like, to me, going through a couple cans of paint. What does progress look like for you? In business, it could be holding your kickoff meeting. If you got a realignment or an organizational change, it could be socializing what's coming. I can't tell you everything, but here's what I can tell you. A lot of times, what we see is one measurable signal instead of this huge dashboard. So again, going back to that one metric, just one. I don't need to build a whole dashboard, right, of all these metrics and how they tie into each other. Just one measurable signal. And then one decision instead of this big strategy document. And I used to be in the world of strategy, so I understand that. I understand the fact that we used to do 3 to 5 year strategic plans. That's just not really realistic anymore. We make a decision, we run it for 90 days, and then we evaluate. What do we need to start, stop, and continue? And then we roll it into the next 90 days. That's how we move things. That's how things start. That's how we move into action and we create that small start. So the goal, remember, of this first 2 weeks, it's not success, it's just getting traction. So during these 2 weeks and after, how do we know that the one thing is working? Because I want to help us avoid quitting too early. So one of the things that I want us to focus on here is what signals matter early. What are those things that we can just tell, this one thing, it's not working. That could be a drop in profits, a substantial drop in profits. It could be a drop in employee morale. It could be maybe that, back to my cookie analogy, you get that cookie and it's just terrible. It tastes terrible. Nobody really likes a chocolate chip with peanut or coconut cookie anyways. But what are those signals that matter early? And then what noise are you going to ignore? If the one thing isn't working and you're getting maybe some pushback, you're hearing rumblings of, man, this reorg probably isn't the way to go. What are you going to ignore? What are you going to filter? What are you going to ignore? And then why early discomfort is normal. When we grow, it's uncomfortable. When we're uncertain, it's uncomfortable. When we can't 100% predict the future, it's uncomfortable. It's normal. I feel that when I get uncomfortable, that's when I know I'm doing the right thing. I always tell folks, if you want to lead an organization, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Because early resistance, it's feedback. It's not failure. So guess what? When can we tell now? We've gone through that first 2 weeks. When do we know when to grow? When do we know when that small start needs to start to scale? Well, we're going to add maturity and we're going to add restraint here. So when we scale is when we're comfortable with baking more cookies, when we're comfortable with going to the next step, when that measurable result, that one observable, measurable signal is checked off. Then we go on to the next signal, right? We may have to stay smaller longer. I mean, that's just a proven fact. And it's okay. Sometimes we have to go slow to go far. And when we get into those situations, those are opportunities. Look at those as opportunities to, again, create that momentum, because once that momentum starts, sometimes we can't pull it back. So we may have to stay smaller longer. And then talking about momentum, sometimes growing too early, it kills our momentum. So there's a balance there. And I'm not here to tell you what that looks like, because it's very specific to you as a leader, as a business owner. It's very specific to the company. It's very specific to the niche that you're in, the organization, the market that you're in. But as we lead, we get that feeling. And sometimes we make the wrong decision, and that's okay. But a decision was made, and we're on down the road. So you don't earn scale with ideas. You earn it with consistency. And in the end, that's where I found most of my success, is starting small and just staying consistent. So let's reflect back to what we've talked about. In these last 3 episodes, we've covered a lot. We've covered how to choose that one thing, how to protect it, and then how to start in a way that actually creates movement. So here's my challenge. Before this week ends, remember, I wanted you to identify one thing at the beginning, but before this week ends, take that one small step on the one thing that you've been protecting, even if it feels unfinished here, okay? Because leadership, it's not about being ready. It's about being willing. I believe in you. Go be great. Talk to you on the next episode.